Hey there, macro folks. This is Mr. Hooker, and this is video 2 of inflation, disinflation, and deflation. This will be the last one of this one. So let's get to it. So inflation expectations, the short run Phillips curve. So for supply shocks, a negative supply shock um, shifts the short run Phillips curve up as the inflation rate increases for every level of the unemployment rate. A positive supply shock shifts it down since the negative one shifted it up as the inflation rate falls for every level of the unemployment rate. The expected inflation rate. So if you'll remember back a couple chapters, what really matters is what we expect the inflation rate to be, right? So everybody has expectations of where they expect inflation to end up. That's what truly matters in life. So that's the rate of inflation that employers and workers expect in the near future. Think 6 months to 6 to 12 months. Okay. So the expected inflation rate is the most important factor other than the unemployment rate that affects inflation. So, like I said, that's really what matters to people. Like, it doesn't matter what the inflation rate is today because you're already experiencing that. What do you expect inflation to be 6 months, 12 months? That is what you are basing your decisions today on. So if you are making purchasing decisions, you are basing those things, anything that's going to require you to deal with a financial professional, you are basing those on what do I expect the inflation to be 6 months, 12 months, 36 months, 60 months. What do I expect this inflation to do over this time of this loan? All of those kinds of things. So that's what we're looking at. All right. So with this one, we started at, the SRPC 0. We were there at 6, moved up to SRPC 2, and we're going to hit a little bit higher. And now we're at an inflation rate of 2. And if we're way back at the 4 point, we've got an inflation rate of 4. So it's kind of crazy. So the Phillips curve seemed to hold in the 50s and 60s, and then we hit the 70s during the stagflation period of the mid 70s. The Phillips curve broke down. Let me just say for 1 second, I don't know that there's a single model available that worked during stagflation. Just pointing that out. Okay. Nothing worked. So we had high unemployment and high inflation. So that was negative supply shocks and higher than expected inflation. So inflation came down during the 80s and 90s. We had low unemployment, low inflation. It worked again, but nobody really people don't use it as much as they used to because of the 70s. But honestly, there weren't any models that worked in the mid 70s. So, it is what it is. Be real. Um, so the short run Phillips curve says at any given point in time, we got that trade off between unemployment and inflation. So in the short run, expectations may diverge from reality, but in the long run, people will just adjust their expectations. So what's the trade-off between inflation and unemployment look like in the long run? We have a long run Phillips curve. So that relationship between unemployment and inflation after expectations of inflation have had time to adjust to experience. And so what does it look like? Basically, any attempt to reduce unemployment leads to acceleration of inflation. To avoid accelerating inflation over time, the unemployment rate must be high enough that the actual rate of inflation matches the expected rate of inflation. So think of it this way, right? If you have a job, you get paid. If you get paid, you have money. If you have money, you are likely to go spend money. And spending money causes inflation. This is why we have a relationship between unemployment and inflation. Okay? So, what we have found, and this long run thing basically, piece goes with this. Natural rate hypothesis says the relationship between accelerating inflation and the unemployment rate is the unemployment rate at which inflation doesn't change over time. That non-accelerating inflation rate of unemployment, or NAIRU, is that unemployment rate at which inflation doesn't change over time. So the vertical line of the long run Phillips curve is the long run Phillips curve, and the relationship between unemployment and inflation in the long run after inflation expectations adjusted to experience. Um, what has happened to the long run Phillips curve in empirical studies is it has fallen apart. Um, so it works in the short run, except for that 1975, mid 70s debacle, but it works in the short run because of what I just explained. In the long run, it tends to fall apart. There's other things that come up and do things, so it's just a thing. So any unemployment rate below NAIRU cannot be maintained in the long run. And this is why I say long run Phillips curve just falls apart. It's a thing. All right, so if the economy is at E sub zero with a 6% unemployment rate, policymakers use fiscal and monetary policy to reduce the unemployment rate below 6%. All right, so there we go. Here we are. So we're at 6. That's point C. At point A, inflation is 2%, and people will expect a 2% inflation rate, which will shift the short run Phillips curve up. At point B, inflation is 4%. People expect a 4% inflation, which will shift the short run Phillips curve up again. And at point C, people expect a 6% inflation, which will shift it up again. So that's what they're saying with that. NAIRU is another name for the natural rate of unemployment, which runs between 4 and 6%. Natural rate of unemployment is the part of the unemployment rate unaffected by swings of the business cycle. So that is just frictional plus structural unemployment. If you remember back, like this was way early in module 2, by the way. So it's way back there. All of this is connected. So in 2023, Congressional Budget Office estimates the U.S. natural rate was 4.4. So our range for that is 4 to 6. So 4.4 is on the low side. Disinflation is the process of bringing down the inflation that is embedded in the expectations. So once inflation has become embedded in people's expectations, reducing it can be difficult. So this is why people are saying now, like, we've got this high inflation and it's probably here to stay for a minute. So disinflation can require a recession. And this is why people are talking. I mean, I'm recording this in mid October, or really, it's kind of late October. It's the week of Halloween. Um, Late October 2025. And you've got some people calling for a recession. Now, remember, macroeconomists successfully predicted 9 of the last 5 recessions. So calling for a recession ain't really unusual. But these cats are calling for another recession. This is one of those things where calling for a recession is just a thing, but it is one way to kill inflation. It's like killing a cockroach. It's one way to do it. But policymakers in the U.S. and other wealthy countries were willing to pay that price to bring down the high inflation in the 70s too. Um, and they might, I mean, it's a weird thing right now. You're getting close. I mean, it's late 2025. Um, political political winds say, you're coming up on midterm elections. Political winds say they would not want a recession. So it's likely they will do everything in their power to not have a recession. But then again, a recession would be good for the long term. One of those things. So deflation, it's the falling aggregate price level, so a general decrease in the price level. Used to be as common as inflation before World War II. So I think we looked at that when we looked at business cycles. Um, you know, we went down as much as we went up. Um, After the war, inflation was the norm, but in the 90s, deflation reappeared in Japan and was pretty hard to reverse. So um, the problem with deflation is, and this is why most central bankers try to fight it like it's the plague. The problem is if you start going down, then you're basically producing less and less output, and you end up firing a lot of people, and you end up with less and less income. The government takes in less revenue. It becomes a massive problem for everyone involved. All right. So the borrowers are short of cash, forced to cut their spending. Lenders do not increase their spending, so it reduces aggregate demand, deepens the recession. Then you got debt deflation, which is the reduction in aggregate demand arising from an increase in the real burden of outstanding debt caused by deflation. If you look into like, if you go to, it's actually like mid to late 1800s, some of the crazy things that have happened, and maybe early 1900s even, some of the crazy things that have happened because, hey, people didn't have money, but, you know, financial institutions or the government or businesses, whatever, were requiring them to pay things that they didn't have the money for. People got people got crazy on that. So it's just kind of nuts how that goes. Effects of expected deflation. Nominal interest rates will fall. There's a zero bound at the nominal interest rate. It can't go below zero. They ain't going to pay you. Um, so they're not going to pay you, and you're not going to pay them to hold your money. So it's not like that. There is the liquidity trap, which is the inability to use monetary policy because nominal interest rates are too low and can't fall below the zero bound. So, there's your liquidity trap. Um, it can occur whenever there's a sharp reduction in demand for loanable funds. If that happens, then we are basically in a bad spot. The U.S. experienced the zero lower bound in the 30s, and again, 2009 to 17, when interest rates were virtually zero. So we've had some issues with that. In the Japanese economy, we had that prolonged economic slump in Japan that led to deflation from the late 1990s on. The Bank of Japan responded by cutting interest rates, but eventually ran up against the zero lower bound problem, which is a big thing. So that's the end of this. We will see you in the next chapter. Everybody take care.